Hello everyone, this is Jacqueline Jax and welcome to another watercolor tutorial. This one is going to be using the Golden Hour watercolor palette. It is such a beautiful palette received by our subscribers for the fall season, and I'm kicking it off with a little bit of yellow. Now this yellow is a super bright yellow. I made it just for landscapes because you know when you need just that real big pop of color and you don't want to have to keep loading your yellow, this is that color. It's highly pigmented, really saturated. Sunflower is the name of it, and it is just perfect for those big bright skies, the big sunny looking florals, and just, you know, all that kind of color. So the other one that I'm using now is Perfectly Ultra. Perfectly Ultra is a version of ultramarine, but it's a little bit different. So I'm diluting it heavily with what's left of the yellow on my brush, and it kind of makes this bluish kind of grayish color for the sky that doesn't necessarily turn green. Then I take my damp brush and I just run it along the line in between the yellow and the grayish, right? That bluey grayish, and it should just be perfect. Now, if it bleeds a little too much, you might want to clean it up, maybe just with a little bit of a tissue. But the way I did it is I didn't pre-wet the paper, so the areas that I was going over were dry, and the edge of where the yellow was, it was kind of like setting a little bit, so it didn't run. Now I'm taking the burnt sienna and I'm really quickly just giving myself some foreground, just for some wisps of wheat type of thing, you know. And this is like just by eye. You want to loosen it. You want to just kind of like go over some of that yellow area. You want it to bleed into the yellow, because you want some that are going to blur into the background and some that are going to pop forward. So as the yellow is drying, I'm kind of utilizing the fact that it's a little bit damp for some of this just to kind of disappear, and some of it's a little more dry, and so I'm getting more of a shape rather than a blur. So you can see I can even go over some areas and darken a few of those little bits, and I'm using just the tip of my angular shader to do that. Some of them are going to disperse, and this is entirely by eye again. This is just me kind of playing around, looking for areas where it will disappear into the background, and some areas where I'm going to be painting that foreground in. So we don't want to cover the entire thing at this stage. We just want to kind of add the layers in and hope that, you know, we get that nice mix of really far in the distance, then the mid-ground, and then the foreground area will be like the more clear, more crispy area. So we'll be painting the foreground, like the really close ones, after this layer dries. But while this layer is still wet, this is a great time to put in those blurred, you know, kind of things, and just keep going over. Now again, this is entirely up to you, so you can determine whether you want a heavy mix of it, or just a light mix of it. You can even add a little more yellow at this stage if you feel like you didn't get that brightness right off the bat and you want to try and like work in some yellow. But at this point, if you noticed, right in the center of my horizon line, there's a lot of white left in there. There's a lot of very light yellow in there. So that was on purpose. And I want to just point that out, because now you're starting to see why it's not all one dimension of yellow. It's multiple dimensions, right? Some of it's heavier, some of it's lighter up at the top, and in the center, it's almost white. In fact, there are some dry brushed white areas there. So now once I get all of the French sienna down, I'm going to add a little salt, because that burnt sienna is going to disperse nicely with a little salt, and it will give us a little bit of texture, surprising texture. Now we're not looking for a heavy salt look, just a little dusting at the lower portion, and that is going to kind of work out really nicely when we put the foreground in, because it's going to give us the wispiness, then a little bit of the texture, and then we'll have the darker pieces in the foreground coming in. So now that this is pretty dry, we're going to mix up two of our colors. the Imperial Velvet from the Golden Hour palette, which is a really beautiful deep purple, and the Verdant Twilight, which is more of like a really dark green. So these two together are going to make a great shadow color. I love shadow colors, especially unusual ones. So if you like your shadow to be a little more green, just use a little more of the Verdant Twilight. If you like a little more purple, then just use a little more of the Imperial Velvet. Both will work out great. I'm using a round brush now with a kind of like a long round brush. It's not like a short one. And I'm dipping in full on into the color, and I'm trying to use what's on my brush and distribute it. Now, my thought process here is to do some really dark lines where the color's really deeply into the brush, but then also let some of the watercolor kind of wear off. And as it wears off, I still want to use that brush to kind of like give myself a little bit more. Now this layer is not entirely dry on or wet on dry. Some of it is still wet on wet. So there will be a few pieces that will blend ever so slightly. But let me just tell you, you don't want this layer to be wet or this will really ruin your painting. You want to lay this darker color down on mostly dry, like completely dry watercolor. Otherwise, it will bleed and it'll look very gray and it will take away the sharpness of this, which is kind of like if you're looking through a really nice camera, there's like an autofocus, right? And some of it, like in portrait view, some of it like is sharp in the foreground, but then as you go into the distance, it blurs. That's what we're trying to create here. And that's why we use wet on wet for some of it and then wet on dry for others. Wet on dry is wet paint on a dry background. Wet on wet is wet paint on a wet background. Just for those of you who are just kind of cluing in for the first time and getting to know all the terms. So now that I have my wisps of wheat or whatever they are, I'm going through and I'm just kind of adding those little dots to give myself that nice texture at the end. Now, if you notice, a lot of the stuff in the background, I'm not going over it, right? Not all of it. Some of it is just existing on its own. But the fact that we're going to paint in more details in the foreground is what tells us automatically, it tells our eye to read the background very, very well. So now if you were wondering what they were, you kind of know what they are because we're giving you the foreground. And this is a little game that painters often play when they want to establish distance, is you paint kind of like a blur, like you're squinting, right? Those images in the background, knowing that you're going to be putting in a couple of them into the foreground that are going to tell the story. And that is going to become like maybe more a lush look, you know, something that you're looking through, and it gives you that beautiful depth and dimension by doing it this way. So if you notice, we haven't spent that much time, right? Just a few minutes kind of layering forward on all this, from the yellow to the grayish sky contrasting, and then we had the burnt sienna pieces kind of going through, and then we had the salt layer, and then after that all dried, we took our shadow color, and now we're just kind of like building our foreground according to the eye. Now always remember, we don't want to do these type of things straight up and down. We want to have things bending and twisting and blowing in the breeze. They look so much more whimsical, and it loosens up the painting significantly. If you were to draw just straight lines, or maybe like very thick lines or heavy lines, and they weren't all different weights of watercolor and different kind of like different feels, like bends, then it would be too repetitious. And what that does is if it gets too repetitious and you don't vary it enough, it doesn't have enough movement. And so then the eye takes it all in at once and it just, boom, it's done. This is by making some of these more wispy and going in different directions, you're moving your eye back and forth, and it now becomes something that you can't look at and take in all at once. So when somebody is viewing your art, it looks more interesting to them because of the layers and because of all the different directions things are going. Now, with that being said, it's not contradicting itself so much that there's like parallel shots going across the thing, right? Like it is very much in a, like the wind is blowing back and forth just a little bit, free flowing. And we do want that. We want not everything leaning in one direction. We want kind of some that are heavier than others, but we definitely want that beautiful fairy tale kind of flow going on. And I feel like this achieves it. Do you know what I mean? If you do, leave it in the comments and let me know that I made sense. It's kind of hard because, like, if everything was leaning in one direction, it would make it feel really off, right? But because things are leaning in different directions, but equally almost, right? Like they're mostly going in the breeze, but like some of them are bending back and forth. That just makes it more interesting and makes it more realistic. All right, enough said. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, give me a thumbs up and let me know in the comment section. I would love to hear from you guys. Don't forget to go and post about what you painted here and who you got tutorials from. And if you do want to subscribe, the fall just went out. This is part of the fall package, but the winter is getting prepared now, and I think you'll really, really love it. As always, you can get watercolor from me at jackswatercolor.com, and that is a wrap for this tutorial. Have a wonderful fall, and I'll talk to you soon.